Hello wonderful people, it is Genevieve, and in this video we're going to draw even more watercolor corals in Procreate. So open up the app, create a new canvas, and let's start drawing. As usual, we're going to start by creating a new layer and picking a brush. I will be using the watercolor brush from my watercolor brush set, which will be linked in the description below along with a promo code, but you can just use any brush that you want, and you could also lower the opacity of any brush and get some sort of a watercolor effect. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to help. You can also pick whatever color you want your coral to be, that's totally up to you. And for this shape, all you're going to do is create some branches that look like the expanding foam that you would use in renovation projects. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's really just kind of a scraggly little shape. So you're going to draw a bunch of different branches and just make them look scraggly by adding blobs on the outside edges. And one thing that is really cool about watercolor brushes is when you're overlaying these branches, you're going to get some really cool effects that mimic what real watercolor would do, which is the pigments would kind of blend together or get darker because they layer over each other. So that's one thing that I really like about these brushes, is that they really do a good job at mimicking real watercolor. So just like that, go ahead and draw, I would say, 6 to 10 branches. And once you have all your branches, you're going to blend some of the overlapping parts, so either using the water blender or just the regular smudge tool from Procreate. And what you're going to do is blend some of the dark or hard edges, I should say. And in this step, basically all you're doing is you're deciding which branch is in front of which. So as you can see here, the tall branch I decided is in front, so I'm blending all the overlapping edges that are kind of inside that branch. I'm not sure if that made a whole lot of sense in words, but if you look at the example in the video, I'm sure you'll understand what I meant. So once you've blended all your edges, you're going to add some color variation using the selection tool set to freehand. And to do that, all you have to do is draw a funky squiggly shape and then feather your selection somewhere between 30 and 40%. And from the adjustment panel, select Hue, Saturation, Brightness set to the entire layer. And all you have to do is just play with the hue a little bit to make the piece more colorful. We're going to repeat this same technique, but this time we're only going to select the top part of the branches. And again, we're going to feather the selection somewhere between or around 30%. And going back to the adjustment panel, Hue, Saturation, Brightness, this time we're going to make a few more adjustments. So we're going to make sure the tips are lighter by upping the brightness. We're also going to up the saturation, and we're going to shift the hue quite a lot. And we're going to repeat this same technique one last time, and this time we're just going to add some shadows in the bottom of the coral. So once more, a wobbly selection that we're going to feather, but this time focus it on the lower part of the coral, and all you're doing at this point is lowering the brightness and maybe upping the saturation a little bit. So you're now going to add more texture to the coral by erasing parts of it. And if you double tap on the eraser, you're actually going to be able to access the brush library. And if you have the watercolor brushes, go ahead and select the color shifting brushes. Otherwise, go ahead with any airbrushing brush that comes with Procreate. And just go ahead and erase some oval shapes all over your coral, and making sure that you're not necessarily doing like a regular pattern. You just want it to be organic and kind of all over the place, different shapes, different sizes. Yeah. Once that is done, you're going to add even more speckles by using the salt brush. And you can see how I forgot to rename my layers, so if you did the same, rename your layer. And yeah, the salt brush, the color doesn't matter at all. All that matters is that you start your stroke from a white part of the canvas or a transparent part of the canvas towards the inside of your shape. We're also going to add some splatters, so go ahead and create a new layer. And this time I'm going to rename it straight away. And you're going to change the blending mode of this layer to linear burn. So clicking on the N next to the check mark, just like linear burn. And later we might change the opacity, but not yet. And select the splatter brush, and with the color of your choice, just add some splatters over your coral. And the final step is to create one more layer that we are going to rename to lines. And on this layer, we're also going to change it to linear burn, I think. Yep. And lowering the opacity to 50%. And on this layer, we're going to add some sketch lines. So go ahead and pick a sketching pencil. In this case, I went with the coloring pencil. And the same color that you use for your entire drawing, basically. And you're just going to sketch some outlines, mostly on the branches that are in the front of your coral. And you're also going to add some extra texture by drawing some like smaller branches on the front of the branches that you already have. Again, if my explanation in words made no sense to you, I'm sorry. I'm recording this voiceover in the middle of the night because there are a lot of constructions on my street, and otherwise if I record during the day, all you would hear is trucks. So yeah, if what I'm saying makes no sense, I'm really sorry, but look at the video and you'll be fine. And you could totally skip this step if you want your coral to just have a regular watercolor soft feel to it. But I quite like adding the sketching line just on some of the branches because it just makes the piece look sharper and just complete, basically. But if you don't have time for that, that's totally fine. I won't be mad at you. And it's probably still going to be a really nice coral. But if you do have time, I recommend that you pause the video here and take all the time you need to do all the branches that you want to do. And I will meet you for the next coral. Wonderful, so let's move on to the second coral. And we're going to create a new layer, and this one we're going to sketch beforehand because otherwise we'll get really confused. So go ahead and create a new sketch layer and pick a nice like dark color that you're going to see for sure, as well as a sketching pencil. And start by drawing a wobbly, wavy line that is going to be the top of our coral. And the best way I can explain this shape is to say it looks like a lasagna pasta. And the way to make that lasagna pasta sheet come to life is going to be, first you're going to draw some vertical lines starting from both ends of your squiggly line. And then every single time that your squiggly lines change direction, you're going to draw one more vertical line. So as you can see, that's going to help you create kind of the waviness of the pasta sheet. And once you have all your vertical lines, all you have to do is kind of connect them at the bottom. So just look at what you have in your squiggly line at the top and kind of mimic the same type of curve at the bottom. If you're not in the mood for sketching though, you can get some pre-made sketches with the palettes, so in the description below. I highly recommend you draw a second lasagna sheet at the back, and maybe even 3, because if you just draw one, the coral is going to look a bit lonely. So use the same technique with the squiggly line and then the vertical lines, and yeah, you'll be good to go. So you're now going to add the color. So create a new layer that you're going to rename to Coral. And you're going to put it below the sketch layer. And you can see here I'm really struggling, but you should be fine. We'll make it. There we go. So on your coral layer, you're going to basically start by picking a color that you want and using the dark edges watercolor. You're going to kind of color in or fill in the individual rectangles one by one, and I will explain you why in just a minute. Oh, and also, you're probably looking at this thinking, why are you just filling in by hand instead of using the autofill function? It's because I want to have some of the watercolor texture that comes with the brush, and I wouldn't be able to get that with autofill. So yeah, rectangles one by one. And the reason for that is, as you're going to see a bit later, doing that technique is going to allow you to create some shadows really easily and really quickly. So as you can see here, once you are at the point where you're drawing the rectangles that are in the front, if you extend your color on the rectangle that is behind it, especially with watercolor brushes, the pigments are going to stack, and so you're going to automatically create a shadow without having to kind of change the color or change the blending mode of your layer. It's just going to be automatically created and done by the brushes and the technique. So go ahead and color in the side of the lasagna pasta that is facing you, and do that on any other pasta sheet that you might have in your illustration. And once again, feel free to pause the video because I will meet you at the next step. The next step is really easy. All you have to do is change your color a little bit. So in my case, I'm going with something a little bit more red. And you're just going to fill in the other side of the coral. We're also going to blend in the shadows a little bit to make for a softer look. So picking either the water blender or the regular smudge tool from Procreate, go ahead and go over the hard edges that you created while drawing your shadows, making sure that you don't blend the actual edges of the coral. And once that is done, you're going to hide the sketch layer. And at this point, you're probably thinking, Genevieve, that looks terrible. What are we doing? And you would be absolutely right, but trust me. So go ahead and pick your eraser and set it to either the basic watercolor or the hard edges watercolor, or a soft brush if you don't have the watercolor brushes. And you're just going to erase over the top part of your coral. So what was the squiggly line on the sketch, you're just going to erase that. And you're going to see that already it's going to make everything look so much better. Once you're done erasing the top squiggly line, you're going to create a new layer that you're going to rename Lines. And you're going to change the blending mode of this layer to linear burn once more. And you're going to lower the opacity. And you might have to change the opacity as we go. You'll see you're probably gonna have to adjust it, but anyway. And pick the soft grainy watercolor brush as well as a really pale color. And you're just going to draw some vertical lines all over your coral, and that's going to add a really nice texture. But as you can see here, my opacity was way too low, so I'm going to make it a bit more intense. But yeah, basically just go all over your coral with vertical lines and you're going to get a really cool result. See, I wasn't lying to you. That looks pretty good, doesn't it? And just like we did for the first coral, we are going to add some color variation using the selection tool and then creating a feathered selection. And with hue, saturation, brightness, we're just going to play with the settings and add some color variation. In this case, I'm lowering the saturation, or upping the saturation, sorry, and lowering the brightness. And then I'm creating another selection, and this time I'm going to up the brightness and lower the saturation, so the opposite of the first time. And the last few things we have to do, you probably guessed it, are the salt brush. So go ahead and pick the salt brush, making sure you are on your main coral layer. Just go ahead and add some speckles. And then we're going to add some splatters as well. So create a new layer that you're going to put above everything, and you're also going to rename it. Don't forget that. So rename it to splatters and change the blending mode to linear burn. You can pick whatever color you want for the splatters. I'm just going with the main color I used throughout most of the drawing process. And using the splatter brush, just go ahead and add some splatters. So there you go. These were 2 more ways to draw watercolor corals in Procreate. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to give it a thumbs up because it really does help the channel. And I always love to see what you create, so make sure to share the result with me either on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And last but not least, don't forget to subscribe because I put out new videos every week.